Micah here with a quick note. This podcast episode was recorded in July of 2017. Much has changed since then, but my best friend Andi Smiles remains my best friend. In fact, these days we live right next door to each other. And I just thought it would be fun to include the very first episode I ever made for the old podcast as the bonus episode of this new one. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to Deeper Than Skin, a podcast born out of real tattoo shop conversations. This is our first episode and we're really excited. Today we're talking to Andi Smiles. The reasons I chose Andi to be my first guest are many. First, Andi is committed to social justice. She's the founder of Rurak Maki, a nonprofit that helps incarcerated women in Peru gain the skills necessary for financial stability and lay the groundwork for their futures. She's also a certified life coach, specializing in helping people who are also committed to social justice as the core of their lives and careers. Third, Andi is an entrepreneur. She started the BFF course, a company helping self-employed women organize their finances and succeed at the business part of their business. That was less than 6 months ago, and it is just what we all needed. And it's doing awesomely, by the way. And last but not least, she's one of my closest friends, and we met when she came to me to get a large tattoo after winning a donated certificate in a raffle. So, Andi, please introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for having me, Micah. So my name is Andi Smiles, and I self-identify as a queer femme and as white, and I'm really excited to be here. So a little bit about me, like Micah mentioned, I am the founder of a nonprofit called Rurak Maki, and we work with female artisans in Peru and Bolivia, and we support them through educational trainings as well as market access and support. I am also the founder of a company called the BFF course, which focuses on helping self-employed women with the financial aspect of their business. And I am also a certified life coach, and I work with people around a lot of different issues in their lives, but primarily how to live a more just lifestyle, and especially in terms of money. I'm also a burlesque performer and the co-producer of a show called The Body Political, which is all about how we can tell stories of the body through performance art.
And we're going to get around to all of those things in the next however long it takes us to have this conversation. So I wanted to ask you about the beginning of you getting tattooed. Tell me, when did you start getting tattooed and why? And so let's start there.
Yeah, so my first tattoo was a very emotional experience for me. So the way that I got my first tattoo was when I was 17, I went to UC Santa Cruz. And I originally grew up in Hawaii. And so going to Santa Cruz was a really big deal for me because it was an out-of-state school for me. And also my brother went to UCSC. And I remember when I was 10 going to the campus and being like, this is my dream. So the fact that I got in and I had my dream just felt so amazing. So I was kind of living in this little bubble, and then I was denied residency of California, and unfortunately, my family did not have the money to afford the tuition at Santa Cruz. And I was crushed because I was 17. I was brought up to believe that what happens next is you go to college. I was going to this college that was like my dream school, and I didn't know what was going to happen because I found out that I was going to be forced to drop out of school at the end of that year because we didn't have the money to pay for it. And so I remember being very, very confused about what this meant about my life. And I was sitting out under the stars one night crying on a bench. And I put my hands put my hands over my eyes as I was crying. And I saw my very first tattoo. And I knew immediately what it meant. And so my very first tattoo is on my right, calf. And most people interpret it as a goddess, and that's not actually what it is. So it starts at the top of my ankle, and it's a very sort of narrow 2 lines, and it wraps around my leg. And as it gets bigger, it takes on the shape of a woman. And sort of as it becomes fully formed, at the end, the woman is holding a red circle. And I knew that what this tattoo meant was that it wasn't actually a woman, it was a path. And that this was the path that as we start off in our lives, our paths are very narrow. We often have this kind of like very like clear idea of what we're going to do. And usually it's based on a lot of what society tells us we're supposed to be doing. But as we go through our life and as we have more life experiences, often some of them unexpected, we become fully formed in who we are. And so as we go through these experiences, and in my case, this somewhat painful experience, we are being shaped. You know, the person and the core of who we are becomes shaped. And that globe, a lot of people think it's a moon, which it's not. The globe is actually just a symbol of wholeness. That throughout our lives, we're really becoming wholly and truly ourselves. So that was my first tattoo. And when I saw it in my mind's eye and I realized what it meant, I became really, really attached to the idea of it being a tattoo.
Can you tell me more about what you mean by saw when you were sitting there crying on the bench? Can you tell me about what that meant for you, that you saw it? Was it like a spiritual sort of vision?
Yeah, it was definitely a spiritual vision. You know, I grew up, my father is Lakota Sioux, and I grew up in a very spiritual household with him. And so I'm pretty aware of when something is sort of just like an image floating through and a really kind of an image or vision that's happening more on like a spiritual plane. And I think in that moment, I'm sure that was a spiritual plane vision. It was a vision of something that was greater than just a passing image. And I, you know, at the time, my awareness of how to get there wasn't as keen, but I still had that sense that I've had in my childhood that was really meaningful. So, you know, I scraped up the money and went to the tattoo shop and got my very first tattoo.
Was there like one shop in downtown Santa Cruz at that time, or did you have a choice? Were you just like, whoever is the first person I talk to? How did you choose the person to give you this significant first tattoo?
Oh man, I almost don't even remember. I mean, it's so interesting because my politics have changed so much, and I think if I were getting my first tattoo now, the way I would choose a shop would be really different. You know, I'd probably want to go to see a woman, maybe a shop that's like woman owned or queer owned or feminist in some way or witchy. But at the time, I think I just picked the popular shop that other people told me about. And to be honest, I don't even remember the name of it. It was some dude. It was for him, it was just like another person. You know, it was just kind of like another through the door. But for me, it really symbolized the first time in my life that I felt like I was really accepting and trusting that there is a path for me and it's not always going to be what I think it is.
Yeah. So how did it feel? Like when you were on that table and he was tattooing you, how did you feel and how did you feel afterwards?
I felt really empowered. You know, that was a hard time for me. I was very, very upset. And I was also really scared of the unknown because I didn't know what to do with myself if I had to drop out of college. And I grew up in Hawaii, so I was in the mainland. I was sort of in this like new type of place. It's very different, you know, going from an island to California. And so there was a lot of fears around the unknown. And I think being on the table and getting the tattoo was really empowering in this sense of it was like a contract of acceptance, and it was exciting. It was exciting to also feel, because I got the tattoo when I was 18. So it was also exciting to feel like an adult in that way, where I had legally the right to make that decision, and that I now had sort of in this like larger sense, the right to make these decisions about my life.
That's a great story. So you have a lot of tattoos now, and you're fairly covered. So let's talk about the tattoo that I gave you, that you came to me for, and that we met over. It's a Peruvian tapestry. It came from a design made by one of the women that you were working with. So tell me how you came to desire that image and how you chose that particular tapestry, perhaps. Is there a special woman that made it? Yeah.
Yeah, so that tattoo was from a bag that was made by the women. So, just a little backstory, the women that I work with in Peru are incarcerated. And in the prison, the only work that is really available, and at the time, the only work that was available, it's a little bit different now because of the work that we do, but at the time, the only work that was available to the women was embroidery work. And what's interesting about it is that this embroidery that they learn to do in the prison through an apprenticeship process, so they're actually learning the skill within the prison, is only found traditionally in that region. So it's this very, very specific embroidery style that is traditional to the region. So it's a marker. I mean, a lot of folk art around the world are markers. They're like the fingerprints of certain areas, and not even like on a cultural level where Peru is a whole place, but these like microcultures within a larger culture. So since the very first time I saw that embroidery, I loved it. And I love Ayacucho, which is the city I work in. And it feels like another home to me. And I just have a very like magnetic pull to it. So when I decided to get that tattoo, there were a lot of things going on. There was one, just the love of the art. And there was also a sense of commitment to these women, because I started this organization in a very kind of unexpected way. It wasn't something I ever planned to do, but I felt like that tattoo was really symbolizing my commitment to seeing this thing through. A lot of times with these marginalized communities, people will start programs and they won't stick with them. They'll go for a year and then it'll get too hard, because real talk, nonprofit sector is shitty and it's really hard to be in it. And it'll be too hard and they'll leave. And the communities get abandoned. So I didn't want to be that person. So the tattoo to me meant that I was going to be committed to this organization and to this program and to these women through anything, right? Because the tattoo is a process. It's painful. There's a healing process. There's a lot more that goes into a tattoo than just like sitting and getting it done. And so getting it was really a symbol of commitment to me, to these women, and a love of the art, a true, really deep love of this beautiful artwork that these women create with their hands.
We're going to have a picture of the tattoo posted up on the website. So check there if you'd like to see it. It's really, truly beautiful work of art. It's so bright and so beautiful. I'm pretty sure you will like it. So the women, when you came back, what did they say? Like, when I know the tattoo took a long time. I don't know, was it a year or so that it took for us to really get it done? So you probably were in Peru like twice during the time that you were working on stages on the tattoo. What did they say? Did they like it?
Yeah, they like it. They think that I'm like wackadoo for like having tattoos in the first place, because they're culturally, where I work in larger cities, like in Lima, tattooing is a thing now. But where I work with predominantly indigenous women, where the culture of tattooing isn't really there. And especially for women. I mean, it's especially, maybe men have like one tattoo, but especially for women to have a lot of tattoos, that's not really a thing. So they think it's really funny, but I think that under the humor, they're really proud of me having this tattoo, because anytime, even now, I mean, we're talking years later, right? I mean, how long have we known each other? 7, 8 years? Like, this is a long time later. And like, even now I go and they'll want me to like kind of disrobe and show off all of my tattoos. And they're always bringing women over to look at that tattoo. So even though they're like laughing and they're like, look at how many tattoos she has, I think they're really proud that their artwork was translated in this way that is being displayed on somebody's body forever, because that is a point of pride. You create something so beautiful that somebody wants to wear it on their body.
For life. Was it a specific woman that created that tapestry that you remember, or was it? I mean, I remember there was a specific image we used, but do you remember if it was connected to a specific person?
It wasn't connected to a specific person. And I think that for me, because of the way our products are made, like our products, for the organization's products, the way that they're made is they're all made by individual women, but they create, like, individually they're creating a whole, right? So if we have 30 bags, they're all created by many different women, but together they are a whole, right? And so to me, I'm kind of happy I don't remember who made the tapestry, because to me it's part of a larger whole, which is this incredible folk art that is coming out of this prison in the central Andes of Peru.
Yeah. Just let's see, next piece will be about this.
Yeah, feel free to ask me if you feel like you want.
That's all right. Okay, so this piece, it's hard. It's a hard piece to like ask about, or like to kind of start that conversation. Just like the wording of it. So
you can also just ask naturally.
Okay.
Like if you were just to ask me.
Yeah. So I want to speak to something that might be on some of our listeners' minds. You said that you identify as white. I know that you're not white completely. Your dad is indigenous native. So that is something, generally the work that you're doing with these women, it's amazing and it's necessary. But a lot of people believe that people who have light skin privilege should not be working with indigenous populations due to a lack of belonging, understanding, even ground. How did you address those questions that might have risen within yourself and also from other sources?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot, because I agree. And I've wrestled a lot with this question of how can I, as someone who it is true that I am not 100% white and that I grew up in an indigenous household with my father. So, but as someone with light skin privilege who, in the world, I'm seen as white. So for all intents and purposes, I identify as white because that's the way I'm seen and that's the way I pass in the world. And I have had privileges given to me because of that. So how can I, as somebody who is, white in most people's eyes, how can I be doing this ethically, and is it even right for me to do it? And where that becomes really complicated for me, and to be honest, I don't really have like what maybe some people would think is like the right answer, because I still question this. But what it came down to for me is, firstly, the women asked me to come back. So I'd met them, and then they had someone write to me to ask me to come back to work with them some more. And I felt like I couldn't say no to that, to a reach out. Like almost that if I had not acknowledged that reaching out, that would have even been more steeped in my privilege to turn away. Because I have sort of the luxury of not, they were reaching out saying, I need your support to do more classes or workshops because you were offering us something that people weren't offering us. And if I had turned away, I mean, that's a privilege to just be like, well, I don't want to do it, right? Because I don't have that need. So there was that. And the best way that I've been able to reconcile it is to really build the organization based on the women's requests. So even though on paper, because the government makes you call yourself something like an executive director, because that's like what the government needs you to be called in a lot of senses. Even though on paper that's my title, within the organization, my title is program facilitator. I don't feel like a director, and I really like everything about the organization has always been built on what we've asked the women. So even the organization's core programming, when I went back and the women asked me to help them some more, I asked them, what do you want? Like, I basically took the standpoint of, I have privilege and I have access to resources. What can you tell me what you need me to do? And so they did. And that became our core programming. Even now, when we do any workshops, like we just did a fantastic production quality control workshop, and the women want to start a production group on their own. So we facilitated a workshop to help them do that. That came out of me asking them, what do you want to workshop on? So I try to frame the organization as a facilitation device and sort of like a bridge. We have access to these resources, human, money, time, and the women don't. So when they pass on a request of what they need or want, we take it really seriously. Like to us, their request is what we should do programming for. And so we really try to take a collaborative model to the way that we structure our programs.
And when you were going there first, you did not speak Spanish that well, right? And you do now. You're fluent. Tell me about that. Like you went and learned Spanish so that you could do this.
Yeah. I mean, I was very naive when I started the organization. Like I literally just kind of showed up and was like, the women asked me to come back. I spent all my money, and just sort of showed up and had no plan and didn't really speak Spanish. Enough to get by, but not enough to really, And so I, quickly realized that it was going to be really difficult to have this collaborative model if I didn't really speak Spanish very well. So I just, over many years put time and energy into speaking their language because I don't really think, there should never be the expectation, especially if you're working in someone else's community, that they would speak your language, first of all. And second of all, if you want to have like true relationships with your community, especially, in the nonprofit world, a lot of times the community becomes a commodity and people don't really have a connection to the communities they're working with. They're often just like selling their community off for grants or for donations. So if you want to maintain like a humanness in the nonprofit sector and really know the community and be friends with the community, like I think of the women as my friends. They know a lot about my personal life. There's a lot of the separation that would typically be there isn't there. Then you need to speak the language. You need to be humble and sound like a 3-year-old and not know how to say something and have the whole prison laugh at you because you said something stupid, and be okay with that and be vulnerable with them because they're so vulnerable with us.
Yeah. Some more.
Do you want me to? Is that good on privilege?
That is good on privilege as far as you. Let's talk about this next bit about if you have anything to say to other people who want to get involved with causes that don't only benefit white people. Okay. That is great. Thank you for speaking to your own privilege and how that came about and how you think of it. I think a lot of people would gain insight from that. And there are a lot of folks who have good intentions who want to work in various communities, maybe those that they don't culturally belong to. What would you say? What are good ways to do that work? What are things to think about? And what are the wrong ways, I guess, to go about that too?
I would say the first thing, especially if you're coming at it from like a volunteer perspective, is be willing to do the shit work. A lot of people, when they think about how they're going to like help people, they really want the glory. And the truth of the matter is, I know I've been talking about, oh, the women are so great, blah, 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 but that is like 10% of my reality in the organization. Like the truth of the matter is, anytime you're in a movement for justice and or working in the nonprofit sector, there is so much crappy work that needs to be done, and no one wants to do it. And it's really, really hard on the people who have the actual skills to like work with the community. So be willing to do the shit work and be humble about it. If you're really wanting to work and serve in communities, be open to serving in ways that aren't about your ego at all, because that's something that a lot of people mistake activism for an ego boost. And people who've been in the trenches for a long time know that often what you're doing is paperwork and filing and really, really boring tasks. That's honestly what most people need help with when it comes to working in communities, like working with a movement or a nonprofit. is the crappy stuff. So one, be humble, be open to doing that type of work because that's where you're going to be truly in service. Two, if you are going into communities that are, and as a white person, I would say showing vulnerability is important. Listening, upholding the leaders of those communities, really focusing on how can the leaders in this community have more space and how can I take a step back? Our job, especially as outsiders coming into a community, our job is to make ourselves obsolete. And if you go in with the perspective that your ultimate goal is for them not to need you, your ultimate goal is to be useless because they have lifted themselves up so much that they don't need you anymore. If that's what you're striving for, I think generally you can do this work ethically. But if your goal is for everyone to tell you how great you are, you really need to reassess why you're doing this, because it's not about you at all. It really isn't. And there will be times where you have to step back in such big ways, and you have to self-manage your emotions around that and not let that get caught up in what's really best for the community and what's best for these like emerging leaders, which is to have more space and more voice and more authority and more power, right? And for you to begin to disappear.
Absolutely. I want to speak to that piece also in privilege. You placed yourself as a person with privilege, and of course you have some privilege over other people. But I also have to say that, watching you and Rock Maki grow over the last now 7-8 years, however long it's been, you have struggled. You've struggled a lot. You didn't have money for your own life, for yourself. You struggled with making your own bills, getting your own bills paid, and yet you went to Peru twice a year. You scraped together money for a ticket. Rock Maki did not pay you to do this. You had to kind of make it work as, working several jobs and being busy with trying to live a life and run this amazing, huge part of your life organization. So I want to say to those people who are out there who maybe are like, well, I'm not a trust fund baby and I don't have the money and I can't start an organization. You can if you want to. I guess you can. Not, a lot of people might not have the emotional resources or the strength that you have, but watching you do this made me feel like it's possible for sure, and really difficult. Do you want to say anything to that?
Yeah, what I'll say is it's really hard to start a nonprofit. It's true. And I think, for those who want to start a nonprofit, a good first step is to see what exists and what you can support. Because, in the nonprofit sector, we really need to focus more on collaboration and collaborating with what existing organizations can be really powerful, more powerful even sometimes than starting your own. But that said, if you have this passion and you're like, I know my purpose is to start a nonprofit or to start a program or to whatever, then you need to follow that, because especially if you can identify what you're passionate about, that really just makes like that thing that gives you the life and fire. If you can identify what that is and how you can connect that to social justice, it becomes really easy, because instead of it being work or oh God, I have to do this thing, you're basically living within your passions, and it feels great. Who doesn't want to live within the thing that they're most passionate about? And when you can connect it to social justice, then you're just like you have so much more access to that, to living in that passion.
Absolutely. So let's go back to, I'm going to say that, we'll end our conversation about Rock Maki specifically at this point, and we're going to have show notes, and we're going to have the link to the organization's website where you can check out what more there is to Rock Maki. You can see photos, you can see blogs, and please do. It's really amazing what Andi is doing here. And I wanted to ask you more about your identity as a queer femme. So when I started tattooing you, you were just kind of exploring at the time. You had been through a breakup, I guess, shortly before, and you were kind of like, okay, now what? Maybe I'm queer and maybe I need to do some dating and kind of see what's up. So um, you were struggling with not looking queer enough. I remember, we would go out dancing and you would be really nervous about how you looked and what clothes you would wear, and people wouldn't think that you were a straight tourist there in the queer space. Tell me about that time, and how did your gender identity move before, through, and after that time? And when did you start settling and seeing yourself as a queer femme specifically?
Yeah, it's so funny to think back on that time because I was so uncomfortable with not really queerness as much as I felt like when I was coming out that wasn't going to be accepted, because I had this thing in my mind that I had already made my choice, because I came out when I was in my mid-20s, and I felt like because before that I had always had relationships with men that which were not satisfying, but I'd had them, that I was that everyone would think that I'd already made my choice. Like that there was just one choice. You got one shot at making it. Like you had to like pick, and then that was it. I didn't really understand like the fluidity of sexuality at that point. Like that wasn't something that I fully grasped. So when I was coming out as being queer, and especially as femme, one of the reasons I felt so uncomfortable with my femness was because I felt like it further reinforced this idea that I had picked being straight, and now was like changing my mind. I mean, it was very like convoluted in my head, but it felt so true. And like as I have been out longer and have been in more queer relationships, and have really like thought about my gender from many different perspectives, and kind of become more familiar in a lot of ways with like queer politics and whatnot, I've realized that I've become really comfortable in my femness. And it was so funny because I think back about that time, like, that story of us trying to go to that dance party and I couldn't pick an outfit because I was like, this makes me look too straight, or this makes me look too what. And I think about that and how like I was like making all these decisions based on like like how people would perceive my queerness. And now at this point, I don't even really think about it, because the identity has become such a part of just my general being in the world that I don't think about, oh, does this make me look queer? Because I'm like, it doesn't really fucking matter if it makes me look queer or not. I am queer. Like, I don't really care if it makes me look queer, because it doesn't change who I am. So it's very interesting to remember the agony over going out that first year or two of like, what are people going to think when they look at me? Because I think honestly, I really had to understand that it was okay for me to embrace an identity that was true instead of an identity that was, really put on me.
And do you feel like having tattoos had something to do with your acceptance? I mean, there's, the queer scene is full of people with tattoos. Do you feel like that helped?
Yeah, I mean, I had tattoos before I came out as queer, but I have a tattoo that you gave me as a birthday gift, which was really my coming out tattoo. It was this tattoo where I guess I get a lot of, as I reflect now, I guess I get a lot of tattoos that have to do with me sort of committing to something or feeling like fully embodied of it. And when I got the hot air balloon tattoo with the Grace banner, it was really about accepting this process of coming out, which was, it's like another puberty. It's very awkward. You're grieving an identity. People who've known you for a long time are not seeing you as how you see yourself. You're dealing with people accusing you of doing this to hurt them. I mean, there's all sorts of weird shit that happens when you come out that is like very bizarre. But and that tattoo was really about accepting this process and handling it with grace. And I felt like it was also about fully stepping into that and not being afraid of the discomfort of coming out, and of, there's a lot to learn when you come out and you didn't experiment when you were 16. There's a lot of vulnerability in there. You're sort of a child again.
It's true. And, for our generation, those of us who are in our 30s, mid 30s at this point, I think very few of us had the chance to experiment when we were 16, right? Like I remember how scary it was to know I'm a little queer kid in high school and in middle school, and I was just terrified that anybody would find out. And then eventually I wasn't as terrified, but I still couldn't let my mother know, and I would go online and try to find somebody who would go on a date with me, and that women just weren't really, I couldn't find women. I couldn't find queer women online even back then. So I think, many of us had either the coming out in college or the coming out later after college, in our mid-20s. And I feel like in our culture, getting tattooed has signified sort of like a defiance, like a fuck you to society. And like, even if you are femme as can be, lipstick and heels, having tattoos also has sort of given you like a tougher edge, like fuck you straight men, I'm a queer femme and I don't care what you think of me, right? So I feel like, at least for me, and when I came out, I was more on the Andrew Boyer side, and that was definitely part of it for me too. It was sort of like a defiance thing. And also, I love my tattoos, but there was a part of owning your sexuality and your gender through putting this art on your body, even if it wasn't explicitly queer imagery.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I look in the mirror, and when I see myself now with my tattoos and whatever color my hair is now, I can't even remember half the time.
Mermaid magical unicorn pony.
Yeah, so whenever my hair is whatever it is, and I look in the mirror and I see myself, and I see that I look in a way that is outside of the expectations of what a lot of people think a woman looks like, it makes me really happy. And it actually makes me feel really sexy and hot, to be in that constant state of defiance.
And speaking of sexy and hot, so shortly after you came out, you started to become a burlesque star. And so let's speak to that. For years, I came to watch you do acts that embodied feminism at its core. So many people just looked pretty taking off their clothes, and you did that while covered in period blood or waving about a gay ponytail, all while deconstructing the way we view the naked female form. So now... it's hard to be a host. I know, but I already, it's like the wording here is pretty good. So I was like, if my mind goes blank, I have to, okay, I guess I'll just read the rest of this. Now, as you already mentioned, you produce a show called The Body Political, which showcases personal stories of resistance and cultural myths about our bodies. And it is amazing. I've been to it. So after all these years of making it to your shows a few times a year, I've noticed that it's hard to find a burlesque performer that doesn't have any ink. Would you say that is true?
Yeah, I would. And I think it's really interesting because, we were just talking about how tattooing is sort of an act of defiance. And I think burlesque at its core is an act of defiance. There's so many ways and attachments that we have around nudity, and especially female nudity. Everything from you shouldn't do that, it's vulgar and gross, to it being hypersexualized, to it being there just for the male gaze, right? There's all these ways, there's all these attachments around nudity, and, especially I think for women. So I think that it's not surprising that burlesque itself is an act of defiance, because we are controlling the context in which we're seen, and we're controlling the context in which we're sexualized and how we're sexualized and if we're sexualized. Some of my acts are very disturbing. I'm eating menstrual blood naked. Is that sexy? That's kind of the question mark, right? So it doesn't surprise me that if we are defying the way that our bodies are viewed in like the context of nudity, that we're also engaged in other acts of defiance, like tattooing.
Absolutely. Do you have conversations about people's ink, like in the scene? Like you go to a show and you guys are all changing backstage and everyone's naked. Like, do people talk about their ink?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're first of all, like backstage at a burlesque show, I mean, everyone is just skipping around naked back there, right? So you kind of like see everyone's ink, and most of us are lovers of the ink, lovers of like the art itself, and it's very interesting to talk to people about their tattoos, and it's a really great way to get to know people. I mean, not in that, like, please don't be like the creepy person on the street that's like wandering up to people trying to talk about their tattoos. That's weird. But if you're generally, if you're in a scene like that, you know each other on some level, even if it's just like seeing each other perform. So it's a nice way to kind of, you're like, oh, I love that tattoo. Oh yeah, I got it. Like, I love this color. Oh, I love that color. It's a nice way to like form a connection with somebody that you already have sort of like this connection with by being in a community together.
So does being a burlesque dancer conflate with being a queer?
Please rephrase the question.
Would you say that there's some kind of a parallel between the tattooed burlesque dancers that happen to be queer? Is there any connection there?
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, there are a lot of queer burlesque performers, but honestly, the scene is so heavily tattooed that it's like queer people and straight people, and I mean, I don't know if I've noticed a true connection between queerness, tattooing, and burlesque. There certainly are those intersections, but the thing that I really like about burlesque is that burlesque has a lot of people who are in the burlesque scene have a really interesting intersection of identities, and they bring that intersection into the art form itself and into their acts. So yes, there are people who are queer and tattooed and burlesque performers, but there are a lot of other intersections with identities as well.
Absolutely. So for our wrap up, I think I would like to ask you kind of an unrelated question. So you are running this brand new business that you just started, this online business. You do sessions with clients around life coaching. You run a nonprofit. You produce a show. You have a partner and a dog. How do you manage your time so well that you're able to be that productive?
Oh man, I get asked this question a lot. I feel like it's like amazing how often I get asked this question. Honestly, I time block my time. Like, that's what I do. I was just telling my Lyft driver this about this today. Actually, we were talking about being self-employed. He's like, "How do you do it?" I time block. So I'll look at my calendar and I'll decide from, this time to this time, I'm working on the body political. From this time to this time, I'm working on Rudock Maki. From this time to this time, it's client work, and I will really stick to that, and I'll set a boundary around what I do and when. And, and what I'll say is what I'm getting better at now as I've gotten older is really like when the time is up, not working until all hours of the night. So really setting a boundary around when I work and when I don't work. And then just sticking to one thing. I find it less emotionally and mentally exhausting to focus on just one project instead of trying to multitask like 20.
That is a great tip. I think a lot of us could use that so as to fight the overwhelm and the exhaustion that comes with this like hectic, busy world where we have so much going on and all these social media platforms to be on and, all the things. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of the effort that you've put out there in the world to create a better world for us and our children, and the amazing person and friend that you are in my life. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'm so excited to hear more stories. After being interviewed, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to hear who's next and hear what they're going to say.